Good morning, everyone. Welcome, welcome. So lovely to have you all joining me this morning for the Reclaiming Birth Summit. Thank you so much for being here. I am going to ask you to join me with your camera on if you're able to. That's really lovely for me because it means I can actually see you and we can interact. But I also understand that that might not be possible for all of you. We'll just wait a couple of minutes for a few others to join the room. I will also ask, if possible, that you have yourself on mute unless you're actually speaking, just because then we won't have too much background noise. So welcome to those of you just jumping in now. Just going to wait a couple more minutes and just to repeat myself, would be really lovely to have you join us with your camera on if you're able to, and also muted unless you actually want to share, because then we won't have too much background noise. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Reclaiming Birth Summit. I'm so happy to be here this morning and share this work with you and share this time with you and share these incredible presenters with you. What an honor and a blessing it's been to record the pre-recorded interviews and also to invite our guests today who'll be joining us. And I hope you can stick around for the day. And if you can't, that's fine. You are more than welcome to come and go as suits you. I completely understand that it might not be possible to be here for the whole day. So I wanted to start by just kind of orienting us into the summit, and to say as an opening, actually, let's begin with an acknowledgement before I dive into that. So I might just invite everyone to close the eyes down for a few moments. Let's take a few deep breaths. Just becoming fully present in your body with your breath. I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I sit, which for me is the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I invite you to do the same. There is so much wisdom around birthing and caring for young babies within our First Nations cultures, much of it in danger of being lost. So it's with a humble heart that we sit on this ancient land, knowing that we are not the first, by thousands of years, in fact, to birth our babies here. I also acknowledge all the teachers that come before me, many of whom are present in this summit. The teacher within and the teachers that surround us, those that have dedicated decades of their lives to this work and to sharing it with us. And I acknowledge the wisdom keepers from my own personal culture and ancestry. If we go far back enough, each one of us has our own Indigenous cultures, sometimes a mix of more than one. And there are birth keepers, wisdom keepers, wise women within our own red thread, within our own lineage. Let me take a moment to acknowledge them too. And I cannot open our summit this morning without remembering the women and the babies in Gaza who are currently experiencing starvation. It's beyond my comprehension to be unable to feed my children or to provide care, shelter, medicine, clean water. We send our prayers and we sit in deep gratitude at the enormous privilege that each one of us experiences. Namaste. Okay, so warm welcome to those of you joining now. Thank you for being here with us today. We are a mix of pregnant women, doulas, birth workers in different capacities, midwives, and prenatal yoga teachers, and all are welcome. And actually, that's what I really wanted to start with today. I've been studying birth work for nearly 30 years now. It's been a deep calling in my life, and I have 5 children of my own. And I've kind of been through different phases and journeys with it. But the interesting thing about birth is it doesn't really change. I mean, the stories around birth and the cultures around birth change, but birth is birth. Um, However, our relationship with rites of passage change as we, grow and age and go through different life experiences ourselves. And I've noticed my own journey with birth has, it's had its own kind of pathway, I guess you could say. Um, in the last couple of years, I've kind of been rediscovering or back down the rabbit hole of birth, I guess you could say, and studying more and talking to lots of different teachers and taking different courses. I've also been reading books, listening to podcasts. I've been really immersing myself. And what's really interesting about the world of birth at the moment, in my perception, and I will just caveat everything I'm going to say with a very clear disclaimer that I believe it's really impossible for any one of us to be impartial. We all have our own opinions, our own preferences, our own dreams and desires. And the birth world brings up a lot of stuff. So throughout today and within the pre-recorded materials, you are going to see opinions being expressed. You're going to see different ideas. And I guess one of my strongest intentions for this summit as we move through it is that each one of you feels really able to follow your own path and take what is there for you and leave to the side what is not helpful. So if you hear me expressing personal opinions or ideas, please know that they are simply my opinions and ideas, and it doesn't make them correct, or it might make them correct for me, but not for you. And the strong intention and invitation that we have throughout this summit is that you are able to stand in your own sovereign power and, again, choose the parts that work for you and leave to the side the parts that don't. So, with that said, what I have noticed, what I believe to be true in the birth world at this time, in Western culture, in our current dominant culture, is a real polarity is emerging because the medical system has gone bananas with birth and really become very overly medicalized and overly um, interventionist and fear mongering, and all the problems that we know exist with the mainstream medical system. It seems to me there's been an equal and opposite reaction, a kind of what we could call a knee-jerk reaction, I guess, towards the free birthing world, sometimes called sovereign birth, and I'm going to talk about that word sovereign in a moment, but towards birth that is completely outside of the system. And I understand why this has happened. Wherever you get one extreme, you often see, the other side of the spectrum. And I am certainly not here to offer an opinion about any other woman's birthing choices. I truly believe that each woman is sacredly and divinely assigned the capacity to decide for herself what the most appropriate, what the most loving, what the most joyful birthing situation would be. However, there are lots of loud voices and there's lots of pressure. And what I noticed when I started to dive into the home birthing world, the free birthing world, what is often called the sovereign birthing world, that sometimes the voices in those worlds were as strong and adamant and I'm going to even use the word militant as the medical industrial complex. And part of the reason that I wanted to create this summit this year in particular was as a response to that. And the subtitle for this summit is Trusting Yourself. Women feeling that they are able to trust themselves. And there are a few different elements that need to be in place in order for us to trust ourselves. One of them is that we need diverse information. So, in order to make a balanced decision about anything, we need to first look at all of the different perspectives, the different sides, the different opinions, the different interpretations, so that we can then make our own choices and decisions. So, part of the research that I would recommend any woman does before birthing her baby, and any doula, midwife, or birthing support person does before supporting pregnant women, is around truly looking at and studying and becoming familiar with what the different options are for women and what the kinds of outcomes are that those options are resulting in. And talking to women that have been through different experiences and listening to different perspectives. And again, that's what this summit is really all about. The word sovereign literally means self-governing. Now, sovereign birth has come to be very closely associated with free birth. But in my opinion, again, when free birth becomes very dogmatic and it has only one sort of set of outcomes or a certain set of rules and regulations around it, that in itself is not sovereign, because it's not allowing a woman to make her own choices. So we look for this energy, this paradigm of true self-governance. And that can really only happen through research. It can really only happen when we actually gather information and then make a decision. One of the pre-recorded interviews that I did for this summit was with a beautiful matrescence educator, a woman called Ali Heppel, and you've all got access to these recordings as of today. And Ali spoke about how after she had her first child, she just had more questions than answers. She had so many questions about her birthing experience, about new motherhood, about being a mother, about the transition from maiden to mother and what that meant, which she then came to understand as matrescence. And so she describes in that interview how she just went down the rabbit hole of research, and she started to study and take courses and really dive into a curiosity and a question asking. And we've all been there, right? We've all gotten into something and then kind of gone and, done all the research and watched all the videos and listened to all the podcasts. But sometimes it feels to me that with birth, women tend not to do that. There can be a real resistance or a kind of blinkeredness, actually, for one of the most important events that's going to happen in your entire life. One of the things I hear women say is, oh, I'm just going to go with the flow. I'm just going to wait and see what happens when I go into labor, and I'll go to the hospital and we'll see what unfolds. And those of you here who have more of a leaning towards natural birth or even home birth will know that that go with the flow attitude really usually leads to lots of interventions. So very rare that going with the flow will lead to anything other than what we call the cascade of interventions. So lots and lots of different variations of intervention that will happen. We know in Australia at the moment that more than 90% of births include some kind of intervention. And to me, what that statistic says is 90% of women's bodies are not capable of birthing their babies. And I personally just do not believe that to be true. I do not believe that to be true. I believe that our bodies are absolutely made for birth and are beyond capable at birthing our babies. And in some small percentages, we'll need help. And in my opinion, when that is the case, that there is enormous gratitude for the medical system and for the interventions that come. There will be times when surgery can be life-saving, when medical assistance can be life-saving, and that is absolutely a blessing. But those times are rare. Those times are not the majority. And yet, the experiences that many women are having in birth, well, way more than the majority, 90+% of women, is the experience of heavy intervention. So something is wrong with our system. And what I am seeing, just to talk a little bit more about this polarity in more detail, is I'm seeing trauma responses in both directions. And as we progress through the day today, I'm very curious to hear what some of you might have to say or what you might think about this. And if we've got some time this morning, we can open up to this. But so in my opinion, one trauma response, and this might be a response to a previous birth that didn't go as expected or as dreamed of, or it might be in response to sort of mainstream media and narratives around birth, things other people have told you, or, the impression you have about birth from the media, from friends or family. One trauma response is to throw all of your trust and all of your sovereign capacity into the hands of medical institutions. So to kind of go with the doctors know best, the hospital knows best, I'm not an expert, they know what they're doing, and I hand it all over to them. Now, that is an extremely disempowering positioning for women. And what tends to happen when women do that, and in many ways, the system is kind of oriented towards coercing women in that direction. What tends to happen is highly medicalized, high levels of intervention, and birthing outcomes that women look back on and feel confused, kind of go, I put my hands, I put myself in the trust of the hospital, in the trust of the doctors, and I feel like I've been railroaded and I'm actually a bit confused and bewildered about everything that just happened to me. This is a very common response to a mainstream medicalized birth. So that in itself creates its own trauma, and the response to that trauma can be more investment in the medical systems. Now, the other and opposite pendulum swing is for women who've had highly medicalized or traumatic births, unexpected outcomes, births that they didn't feel that they were autonomous within, sovereign within, swinging right over to the other side and choosing to free birth and choosing to have unassisted, unsupported births. Now, I have no
Hello.
positioning against free birth. I think that free birth can be a really beautiful choice if it's made from a place of trust and sovereign centering. But if that choice is made as a trauma response because the medical institution has let a woman down so badly, then actually what can happen is the free birth in itself becomes this scenario of great pressure, of expectation. The woman puts upon herself a huge burden and feels that she has to achieve this perfect free birth, or there's a sense of failure. And again, this is something in my own practice and my own work as a doula and as a birth worker I've witnessed more than once. There's also uh, an emerging group of people in the free birthing world that have, I'm going to use this word again, my opinion, that are quite militant and that actually set women up to feel like they've failed almost as much as the mainstream medical institution if they don't end up having the perfect home birth, the perfect free birth, the perfect, you know, no intervention, no support scenario. What's the alternative? Well, as I've mentioned already, in my opinion, what really is going to bring us back to center, bring us back to truly sovereign birth, is personal responsibility, radical personal responsibility, research, and coming back to our own inner knowing, our own intuition, and our own self trust. Now, this is really, really difficult for a lot of women because many of us do not know what our intuition is telling us. We can't trust ourselves. We are overwhelmed. We are confused. We've got a zillion different voices with strong opinions being forced upon us. And it's really hard to get to that place of inner knowing. Now, there are some tools and some conditions that will really help us to move into that place of self-trust. One is good education. When you feel educated about something, it really enables you to make good choices. Anything, if I wanted to take up knitting, right? Which is not going to happen. I'm not good at crafty things. But let's just say I wanted to take up knitting. I'm not just going to blunder into a knitting shop and buy whatever wool, whatever needles, go home, try to figure out how to do it by myself. It's not going to be like that. I'm going to maybe watch some YouTube tutorials, maybe chat with some people who already knit, get some recommendations, get the correct needles for a beginner. Think about what kind of wool, what kind of pattern, what kind of garment do I want to knit, etc., etc. So we do the due diligence, we do the research, we dive into the rabbit hole, and then we start knitting the scarf, right? Exactly the same with birth. I cannot tell you the number of times as a doula, as a prenatal yoga teacher, as a friend, I've witnessed women who are intelligent, capable, educated, smart, beautiful women hand over all their power when it comes to birth. Just go, I abdicate responsibility. I don't know. This is an unknown for me. I'm handing it over. Whether that's to a home birthing midwife, a doula, the hospital, doesn't matter. The only way that we're going to be able to birth our babies without traumatic outcomes is by standing in the center of our own empowerment as women. And another thing I can tell you without doubt is that this translates to parenting. So I often think about the labor as being like the wedding, and then the parenting is the marriage. We put a lot of emphasis on weddings, and then afterwards, guess what? You're married to this person for the rest of your life. Um, Similarly, with labor, we put a lot of focus on the labor, which is without doubt important. Um, and to be honest, I probably wouldn't have said the labor was so important until I had a not great labor myself. So I had four really good, natural, no intervention births with my four boys. My last child was my little girl, and I ended up having a highly medicalized birth with her. Um, for various different reasons, but it left me quite traumatized, which is another reason why I'm still here doing this work. I had a break because I kind of needed to recalibrate, but I've come back having had the experience of going through, even after being a doula, being a birth worker, being a prenatal yoga teacher for so many years, going through a difficult birth that I felt was disempowering. And so I say this, having experienced both sides of the coin. Um, when we have this experience of being in our own power, we start to notice how to make sovereign decisions, to notice when a decision feels aligned, and then we can create the conditions to have a positive birth experience. And the factors around that positive birth experience are going to be different for each and every woman. So, for example, who do you want your birthing team to be? For some women, it's going to be imperative that they have their partner there while they're birthing. For some women, it's not. And even though they love and adore their partner, they might not actually feel like their partner's the safest person to have in the birthing space with them, or the person that they really want. Likewise, with your mother or your best friend or your sister, perhaps they are the perfect birth companion, perhaps they're not. Some women will feel safer birthing in a hospital. Some women will feel safer birthing at home. Uh, the key word is safety and choice. So it doesn't really matter who your birth team is or where you choose to birth, as long as the decision making around that is coming from a place of deeply felt autonomous sovereign decision making, that you're not being pressured by someone else, and that you're fully resourced. You have as much information as you need to have to be able to make this decision. And then you learn to trust yourself. And in trusting yourself through labor, once you have that beautiful baby on the other side, you'll learn to trust yourself as a mother. The journey of motherhood for me has gotten easier and easier with each baby that I've had. And part of the reason for that is because I have now such a really deeply established sense of self-trust and my own intuitive knowing as a mum. And I still do research, and I still need help with different things. I'm on different journeys with different children. Um, I'll give you an example, which very much lines up with the example of how we birth our babies. One of my sons is dyslexic, and I've been on a big journey with him around helping him with literacy, with learning to read and write, with schooling, with tutors, with extra help, etc., etc., diagnoses, pathologies, etc. And the journey of figuring out, me and him together, how we're going to support him through and navigate through this experience of dyslexia is like so many other different parenting journeys. It's like the journey through toilet training, the journey through deciding whether to immunize, the journey through introducing solid food, breastfeeding. The list is endless, right? And if we take this approach of doing research, finding an aligned team, making our own sovereign, intuitive, self-trusted decisions, we really can't go very wrong. Where we get derailed is where we outsource, where we don't believe in our own ability to make decisions for ourselves and for our children. And that includes babies in the womb. So I hope that I'm inspiring you here because that is absolutely my intention. And I'm also really I have a very strong intention not to speak particularly for or particularly against any choices that women make in birthing. And I am surprised in all honesty, I'm genuinely surprised that it feels like there are very few spaces online or in the world of birthing where that's actually possible. Most of the spaces have some sort of agenda or some kind of um, something they're kind of advocating for more strongly than something else. I got an interesting message from a long-term student. She messaged me on Instagram just before signing up for this summit, and she said, is it secretly pushing the home birth agenda? Because I'm having a hospital birth and I really want to be supported and I want support with natural, non-interventionist choices, but I don't want to feel guilty and shamed because I'm not having a home birth. And it kind of broke my heart a little bit. I replied straight away. I was like, no, it's not a secret home birth agenda. You know, I've had hospital births, I've had medicalized birth, I've had a home birth, I've had births with no interventions. I've done the full spectrum myself, and I've witnessed and supported women in every scenario you can imagine in their birthing. And I can tell you right now that the women who had the best births were the ones who felt in their own power and in their own sovereign self-trust. I have seen women have cesareans and come out feeling joyfully radiant that they made the decision that was right for them. And I've also seen women home birth and attempt free birth and come out desperately disappointed and feeling that they've failed because of the judgment of others or because they didn't get the outcome that they wanted. So it is not about the story around the birth. It's about the internal experience of birthing. And likewise, that will translate into motherhood. It will translate into parenting. A couple of little stories I want to share, and then I'm going to have a look in the chat and open up to any questions that you might have. But from the pre-recorded interviews that I did that kind of tap into what I've been talking about already this morning. Beautiful Anna Flavia, who I interviewed about her own wild pregnancy and free birth experience, really nailed this idea about the sovereign birth and self-trust. And she told a couple of beautiful stories in her interview. I encourage you very strongly to listen to it. She spoke about being at home and actually being with her young son, who's a toddler, while she was pregnant, and slipping. It had been raining and she slipped and she fell down some stairs. And she had this really confronting experience about what to do next, you know, whether to go to the hospital, whether to whatever. She felt very scared, as you would. And she went through a whole process of self-trust and almost like a self-initiation after that incident had happened around the decision-making process around what she would do with what had happened. And you know, she was fine, the baby was fine, she had a beautiful free birth at home, and everyone's thriving. But the way she speaks about that experience and the story around it, I found very moving and a really good example of this generating self-trust, this process of generating self-trust that I'm speaking about. Another woman that really exemplified that for me is Dhyana Masala, who is a long-term yogi. In fact, she lives in a family of yogis. She's a multi-generational yogi, I guess you could say. And she birthed her babies at home and very much in the Bhakti yoga tradition, very, natural and non-interventionist. And really, the way she spoke, particularly about the postnatal time, with a very family and spiritually connected orientation around postnatal care was very inspiring to me. It was the opposite of the narrative that we so often hear around sort of like you've got to get back out there and all that type of thing. Um, and much more around nurture, self-care, time, time out, time to recuperate, time to be family. And that was really, really helpful and interesting to listen to. And I know that you guys will find that same kind of sovereign energy in her experience of pre and postnatal time. There's a couple of other little golden nuggets I really want to draw to your attention. I had a real light bulb moment myself when I was interviewing Waiapio, who is an elder midwife. She's been practicing as a midwife for decades and has delivered thousands of babies. And this is a woman who has a deeply, deeply spiritual understanding of birth. And at some point in our interview, which again, you've all got access to those recordings, we were speaking about pain and we were speaking about how pain presents in childbirth and managing pain. And she articulated in a way that I'm probably not going to do justice to now. So you're going to have to go and listen to the interview. But she articulated how when we go into the altered state of birth, when we go into the liminal space where the theta brainwaves are happening, and we're not in our right minds, right? We're not in our decision making, sort of linear mental states. We're off with the fairies, and this is the place from which we should be birthing. This is the best place from which a woman can birth her baby. But what she described is that in that space, your relationship to pain completely changes. And I hadn't quite connected the dots in myself, but when she said it, I realized this is exactly my own experience of birthing. That whenever I've had the opportunity to birth quietly, surrounded by people I love, when I feel safe, when it feels, very simple things, not bright lights, not lots of people asking me questions, really able to drop into that liminal space. Yes, there's been pain, there's been discomfort, but it's been incredibly manageable and almost um, like I could almost connect with the fact that the pain and the surges were dilating me and enabling me to get closer to birthing my baby. It felt very right and very, very manageable versus experiences of pain I've had where I've been unable to drop into that more sacred liminal space where there have been bright lights and medical staff and questions and decisions to be made, and I haven't felt safe. And, my last baby I birthed during COVID. I was older, so there was a lot of pressure around, rules and regulations and fear mongering, essentially. Uh, and it was really difficult for me to manage the pain in that place. So, what Waiapio really described is that pain isn't a set thing. It's something that we are in relationship with in reference to the context in which we're experiencing it. Just like you could be experiencing heartbreak, but feeling it as a kind of longing or a kind of like, in a poetic way, in a way that feels almost quite wholesome and quite necessary. Or you can be experiencing heartbreak in a way that feels desperate and beyond what we're able to manage and what we can cope with. So, pain, there are different levels and different spectrums of pain, but even within that, our environment, our support team, and our context radically impacts our experience of pain and how it manifests in childbirth. And for me, the way that Wapio described that, just something clicked in my brain, and I went, yeah, that's it. I really got the download. So I want to encourage you to listen to that recording if that's something that you are interested in. Finally, before I open up to the chat and any questions, I want to mention Pam England, who is also an elder midwife and a pioneer in what is known as birth story listening. One of the reasons that so many women have the experience of a very negative impression of birth is because they've heard a lot of horror stories. They've watched a lot of horror stories on the media, and they've heard a lot of horror stories from other women. And one of the reasons for this is that many women are walking around with birth trauma that they haven't processed, and they've got nowhere to put it. So what happens is you're standing in line at the supermarket and you're heavily pregnant, and someone comes up to you uninvited, unsolicited, and starts telling you their traumatic, dreadful birth story because it's alive in them and they have no place else to go with it. Our mainstream medical complex, mainstream medical system does not create safe spaces for women to process the trauma or even just the story that they're carrying after birth. Pam England's work has absolutely pioneered the stories around our birth. She calls it birth story medicine or birth story listening, and she creates safe spaces for women to process birth trauma. So, or not even just trauma, not even only trauma, stories to process, because birth is such a big deal, to process the experiences of birth so that they can go into subsequent births or support other women in birth. In a way that feels resolved and reconciled and healed, so that we don't become that woman at the supermarket that is, insisting on sharing our birth story to someone that probably won't benefit from hearing it. So her work is very important, very powerful, has been very helpful specifically to me as an individual woman, and I think very necessary. And for those of you who feel called, if you are a doula or a midwife or a birth worker of any kind, I do think that adding the skill of birth story listening to your toolbox is a really potent and powerful one. Training in that specific method is, yeah, incredibly, incredibly powerful. I hope that gives you somewhat of an introduction. I'm not going to introduce our live presenters because I'll do that as we go. But thank you again for being here. I'm so grateful to all of you that are joining me live, and we'll be here for the rest of the day. And of course, those of you listening to the replay as well. Let's have a look in the chat first of all. So Shelby's saying that she made an informed choice to have a VBAC, which means a vaginal delivery after a cesarean at home with my third, but called the paramedic at pushing stage where I feel my choice isn't accepted amongst the free birth community. Yeah, there's a lot of shaming in the free birth community if you end up transferring to hospital. And there's a lot of shaming in the hospital system if you choose a home birth or a free birth. And this is exactly what I'm talking about. We need to stop shaming each other. We need to stop polarizing our positioning and speak about our own lived experiences and offer information and support and unconditional love. Thank you for sharing that. Natalie saying to Shelby, I'm sorry that some people reacted that way. To me, your choices would be your instinct telling you exactly what you need for your own reasons. Absolutely. All these big stages and rites of passage are so significant in how we move through them. Yeah. As a rebirthing breath worker, I find this so important when identifying patterns, sometimes imprinted from birth and all unique. Exactly right. We're all on our own journey. Natalie is saying, I've always wanted a better name for free birth, and the best idea I've had so far is to call it and any birth a self-responsible birth. I love that. This helps any woman realize they will literally take all and full responsibility for their outcomes, not hire a doula and think they are getting help to birth by someone else. This is true. And also, Natalie, I would add to that as well, that when a woman needs help, she feels able to receive help too. That's another element to it, because sometimes what can happen in free birth community is there's so much pressure to do it autonomously without any help. Like even to the point where I've seen videos of this, I'm sure you have too, women struggling to catch their own babies because they feel like to even have a partner or a sovereign midwife catch the baby for them would be like they've failed because they had someone else help them. There is no failure through asking for help. And again, So often, what we see, this red thread idea, what we see when we first reach puberty, what we see when we first experience our own sexuality and our menstrual cycles, what we see in conception, all creates the patterning for what we see in childbirth, which then creates the patterning for how we mother, which then creates the patterning for our experience of perimenopause, menopause, and moving into elder years. And if we have the experience of I can't ask for help as a foundation narrative, whether that's in our birthing situation, whether that's as teenagers when we first start getting our menstrual cycle, whether it's in sexual union with our partners when we're conceiving our babies, like I can't ask for what I need, I can't ask for support, I can't ask for help. That's a patterning and it gets carried through. And again, I would argue there's a place of balance, there's a middle ground. Yes, we stand in sovereign self knowing and self trust. And sometimes self trust says, I would like someone to help me right now. I need someone to catch the baby. I need to move from the bed to the floor and I need a hand to do that. And that's okay. That's okay. Okay, so Shelby has a question. Around the misconception she hears presented by breath workers about yoga. They say, oh, yoga is about withdrawal of the senses and breath work is sense amplification. I guess I want clarification on a yogic approach to birth. I want to be able to honor the traditions here and speak up to that generalization when it comes up. Okay, it's a really good question. So, actually, Shelby, what yoga says about withdrawal of the senses and sense amplification is that we can dance between the two. So pratyahara is an element of pranayama, like of control of the breath or working with the life force. Whenever we're doing breath work in yoga, we're actually always working with the life force. So one way to work with your life force, your prana, is to draw it inward, right? In fact, a very beautiful description in Charaka Samhita, which is one of the yogic or Ayurvedic ancient scriptures, is of the baby in the mother's energy body and how all the energy in a pregnant woman's body goes zoop to the middle to the baby. So when we're not pregnant, we've got energy or prana moving around in all kinds of different directions. We have upward moving energy, which is called pranavayu. We have downward moving energy, apanavayu, and all other types of energy. We've got the aura, we've got digestion, we've got communication, etc. Right? When you're pregnant, according to these teachings, these subtle anatomy teachings, all your energy is just towards the baby, like a star kind of drawing us in, like a little vortex, an energetic vortex. So pranayama in pregnancy is going to be, by definition, quite an internalizing experience because energetically we're drawing energy in. However, in labor itself, we're going to use the breath in a very, very different way. And actually, my preferred way of working with breath in labor is to really direct apanavayu, which means the downward moving force of energy, which is externalizing. I mean, there's never a time that you're going to externalize more than in labor, right? You're expelling a baby. It's like the biggest externalization that can happen. So the energy moves from centered down and out. And actually, if women can breathe that, sometimes in um like non-yogic circles, it's called the J, like the image of the letter J. If women can breathe that energy out and down, it can really help facilitate a positive birthing experience. So, short answer to your question is yes, pratyahara means withdrawal of the senses, but no, it's not the only way we can practice pranayama. And we can use breath work in yoga to direct energy or prana in different ways, including to externalize energy. For example, there are other practices you can do when you're not pregnant that expand your aura. That's externalizing energy. And I mean, yeah, I could talk a lot more about this. I have a lot to say. There's a whole section in chapter 2 of the Yoga Sutras where Patanjali talks about being able to expand energy outward versus pull energy in. And he describes that we should be able, as yogis, to do both. So there might be times when you want to draw your energy in and really contain it, and other times where you want to expand your energy out and really project it. And he describes the siddhi or the power of being able to do both. I hope that goes some of the way to answering your question. Um, there's a lot to say about it. But it's an oversimplification to say that yoga is only ever about pratyahara. Um, and yes, Natalie, yeah, rescue versus help. Actually, I love that. I love that you've highlighted that because that's an interesting distinction I've never made quite so clear. But see, already we're getting some golden gems from today. If we can use the word help, I think there's a place where we can use the word help appropriately and usefully, but we never want to rescue a woman. So I love that distinction. That's really beautiful. Thank you for helping me get that clarity. Chloe says another patriarchal push on women to feel shame or like they're failing and have to do it all alone and not accept help. Yes. So detrimental moving into parenthood and motherhood. Yes. And yeah, I'm sad to say I've been seeing it quite a bit in the free birth movement. I have. It really saddens me. Um, like this thing of we can't ask for help. Shelby says, thank you. I want to dispel the misconception in breathwork communities. Yes, absolutely. Um, so Natalie's saying when something's not going well in a free birth, the woman can either turn to her strong inner instincts and know what she needs, but also sometimes she can externalize and seek rescue or help and hand away her own internal knowledge. It's a huge topic, and yes, you can't cover it in the comments. Absolutely, completely agree. And then my question, and this is the question I've been asking myself again and again and again in birth work, is the only thing we really need to know is, am I giving away my power? Am I handing over my sovereign knowing? In any direction, am I allowing someone else, whether it's the free birthing advocate, the home birthing advocate, the obstetrician, the highly medicalized person, my mother, my partner, my next door neighbor, whoever it might be, am I letting them sit in the driving seat of this birth? And if so, how can I get back into the driving seat? How can I be the one that is autonomous in the decision-making process as it unfolds? And it's really hard because we're culturally conditioned from birth as women to externalize our power. This doesn't only happen in the birth room, it happens in all areas of our lives, but it shows up in a particularly potent way in the birthing space. Okay. I'm going to try and stick to time. That was such a rich conversation. I feel like we could, of course, keep talking. I'm sure there'll be many, many moments like that throughout today. But let's take a break. I've deliberately scheduled the day to have 15-minute little breathers or buffers in between our sessions so that you have time to step away from the screen, stretch your legs, get some water, whatever you need to do, use the bathroom. So we will return in 10 minutes at 11 o'clock, and we're going to have a session talking about the business side of being a doula or a birth worker. So this will be equally as relevant for those of you who teach prenatal yoga, anyone who is in a role of working in birth, around, how to make this work profitable and viable so that you can generate sustainable income and continue to do the work in a way that is sustainable for you and making a living, which I know for many birth workers is really difficult.